One of the great things about being an open-minded, open-hearted, open-handed Christian is that you don't need everyone to believe what you believe or to see things the way that you see them. It's okay. So if you've never heard of demythologizing or the linguistic turn or deconstruction, that's fine. You might enjoy what I'm about to say, reflecting on the 4th chapter in our devotional. If you don't, that's fine too. I like loosening up the language of faith and making it a little more, whether you call it inclusive or open-ended or non-concretized, however you want to talk about it. So for instance, we're really good at this sometimes with like miracles. So some people get really, dogmatic about how we talk about miracles, and they introduce this thing that's not in the Bible called supernatural. And that's a category from the Enlightenment and the scientific age when anything that was unexplained, that was supernatural. And I've moved away from that sort of, whether you call it a metaphysical realm or just an understanding. And so when we talk about miracles, I'm not talking about breaking the laws of nature, the laws of physics. But I really appreciate how philosophers talk about the event. An event in philosophy is when the result, the happening, exceeds what you would expect if you just looked at the smaller component parts of what made it up. And so an event is surprising. It exceeds what you would expect. And so, like, for instance, miracles, we talk about the miracle of birth, but it's actually the most natural thing in the world, right? It's not supernatural. Miracles aren't necessarily supernatural. And I do the same thing. Like, remember when the guy, the pilot, landed the plane on the Hudson, and we called it Miracle on the Hudson? Sully, that was a miracle. But it wasn't that God intervened and placed the plane down on the water. It's that his hundreds and thousands of hours of training kicked in and provided something surprising, unexpected. And so we called it the Miracle on the Hudson. I think this is a good move. And so in the chapter that we read this today, we talk about testing spirits. The author encouraged us to test spirits. And that's something for me that has had a long history as a charismatic evangelical pastor. The spiritual realm, whether it was spiritual warfare and prayer or whether it was deliverance ministry of exorcism, I spent a lot of time thinking about spirits. And in the 15 years since I sort of migrated, evolved, changed, however you want to talk about that, what do you do with spirits and spirit language in the text of Scripture? I think we have to do the same demythologizing, deconstructing, linguistic turn that we do with event and miracles. There's a really easy way to think about spirits, because we talk about the spirit of the holidays, right? Or the spirit of America, or when we talk about that, we're talking about energy. And I think that's really helpful confession, is that we're not talking about ancient beings, right? That like maybe were in heaven and then they came down from a different realm and they still operate around us, but we can't see them. Like, we don't have to talk about spirits as entities or beings, but to sort of conceptualize an energy. And so it makes sense that the language of Scripture it's not that difficult, actually. It's a pretty easy transition to talk about, when we talk about spirits, to realize what we're really talking about is energy and connection. So in the stories, even in our Gospels, when Jesus delivers somebody, there is a brokenness there, either from community or in their human experience. And in the brokenness, the fracturing, if you will, shadows are created. And so we talk about darkness and, dark spirits and stuff. But Jesus heals the person, brings them into wholeness, largely sometimes by bringing them back into community and connection. And that energy that connects us all is the spirit of community. And so I just think that there's a helpful and hopeful way of talking about this in sort of a more metaphorical or demythologized way that I have found I've found it very helpful. And the permission, especially in the 21st century, in a technological and media saturated existence, to talk about faith and the elements of faith, not in necessarily in ways that are frozen in amber in a first century understanding of things like this and in an antiquated metaphysic, but to update and maybe innovate the way that we conceptualize and we talk about it, because the truths that are discussed are still true, but the way that we understand them and communicate them and participate in them can be updated in life-giving ways and don't need to be frozen in the past. So just wanted to throw that out, that if you read this chapter on discerning spirits and you think, yeah, this is the thing that I'm not so sure about, to just give yourself a little permission. Especially, I think it's best done in communal discernment, in community, to bring that old worldview into our modern context and to be able to reconcile them in a healthy and life-giving way so that we can still be people of faith, but not in a way that says like, the way that it's described by the ancients is the only way that we're allowed to talk about it. So that's my suggestion. Let me know if that was helpful to you.